Hey, Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise, glory, and honors to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harakak Kodash. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations unto the elect of the nation of Israel. This is your brother Ayash Gabar from the GMS Virginia camp coming at you with another lesson that I pray that you find edifying through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai. And this is going to be a quick little lesson going into how some people perceive us men of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. They see, they know that there's something different about us. They know that we're not like the rest. You know what I'm saying? But they can't quite put their finger on what's different about you, but they just know you're different. You're not of the type that follows the crowd. You're of the type that finds solitude in being alone. And essentially this goes into how I am around Salakia. This goes into like how I'm around people of the world. And, hey, look, I'm comfortable being by myself outside of the brethren, and that's another thing too. When we get together, it's a beautiful thing, that people gravitate to when they see us get together. Brothers get together and go out, you know what I'm saying, to go get something to eat or go and get a few drinks or whatever. People see that the way we interact with each other is something that they're very uncommon. It's a very uncommon thing, and like I said, people gravitate to that, because their curiosity lends them to want to spend more time around us, to try to figure out what's different about us, So I'm going to break out a few precepts and go into it a little more. But this is the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 17. And it reads, "Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you." And when you come into this truth, you want to tell everybody, the revelation that you've been blessed with. But people don't want to hear it if they're not in the spirit, So, Salakia. So, I mean, that zeal to just want to tell everybody in the beginning slowly fades away once you realize that not everyone can receive it. And in their not receiving it, you tend to develop this mentality of keeping keeping this truth to yourself away from your loved ones, because it's your loved ones that actually tend to think that you're fucking crazy. I hope bros understand what I mean by, what I'm saying, because when I came into this truth, man, hey, I was a different person. I'm not saying I was so different that, I wanted to be around everybody. No. But I was a different person where, I didn't have a problem conversing with you. I didn't have a problem with certain things that I have a problem with now. And being in this truth is a lonely thing, because you really don't run into people that understand the scriptures. You really don't run into people that that is blessed with the Holy Spirit. You know, even though a lot of people claim that they have the Holy Spirit, they don't have it. You know, they don't even know what it is. And so when the bros get together, you know, under one spirit, you know, under one banner, you know, it's a beautiful thing, you know, and the love that we show one another, you know, the people just can't understand it, you know. And when we're away from bros, we tolerate the bullshit of our daily lives, yearning to be around bros even more and more the next time we get together. Or at least that's the way it should be anyway. But when you're not around bros, you know, you're alone in the world, you know, and that's when you're really tested in a lot of ways, because, you know, you encounter spirits, you encounter these fucking demons, you know, you deal with the battlements of the city with just you and Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, you know. And the people really don't understand when you separate yourselves from them, you know. And it's a curiosity to them, you know, like, how do you do it? What are you doing? You know, always looking over your shoulders, you know, to see what's looking over your shoulders, you know what I'm saying, to see what's playing on your phone, or, you know, ear hustling when you get a phone call from a brother, you know, or whatever, you know, always watching what you're writing down if you're trying to put lessons together or whatever. They're very curious as to what we do because it doesn't involve them. And they see that when everybody else is dependent upon each other, we depend upon Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, you know, which can turn into a problem later on, you know. Let me see what precepts I want to grab. Let me see, because I grabbed a bunch of precepts from the book of Job, you know, because Job was going through it. Let me see. I'll just read Job chapter 22. I'll just go into Job chapter 22, starting at verse 21. Acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. And that's what we're at. We're at peace when we you know, in our solitude, you know, because while everybody's having these fucked up conversations, the look, the conversations of these people is really fucking vexing. You know, especially if you're around Edomites, because they start doing that Mo shit, talking that Mo shit. And if you're around Jakes or around Edomites, then the conversation might get turned into another. It's a very vexing situation, which when it gets to that point, I don't have a problem with being alone, you know. So I acquaint myself more and more to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, which puts me at peace. You know what I'm saying? It puts my spirit at rest. Thereby, good shall come unto thee. Receive, I pray thee, the Lord from his mouth, and lay up his words in thy heart. You know, because when when these people start holding these conversations, you know, I tend to get away from them as quick as possible, as much as possible. You know, and then, you know, you start getting these fucking looks, which, you know, I really don't care about what the people think about me anyway. But, you know, you start getting these looks like, you know, he's too good for us, or whatever it is that they think or they say when you're not around them. But you know, you know, it's when you're able to combat those things in the spirit, and lay the law in your heart, lay Yahweh Bashem Yahushai in your thoughts, you know, that you're genuinely at peace, you know. Jumping down to the book of Job, chapter 22 and verse 23. If thou return to the Almighty, thou shalt be built up. Thou shalt put away iniquity far from thy tabernacles. And the most time I typically spend with people is at the plantation. When I get home, I'm at peaceful peace. But, you know, the more we lean towards Yahweh Bashem Yahushai and what we do, we'll be built up, and it's also a good thing, to go through these things of the world anyway. So that way it puts into your mind what you don't like about it more and more. It actually gives you a preview of the mindset of the people. These people are just so lost, so dead, that their conversations are basically abominable, outside of talking about sports and, whatever it is that they're into, Like I said, when you start holding conversations with E, it starts going left real fucking quick. And with Jake really don't know what the fuck to talk about, Jake more than likely will either talk about a weekend barbecue, a weekend get together with, family and friends, or how much he or she hates the job. And yeah, we might play Clark Kent with that shit, acting like, we're on the same level with Jake, but our interactions with Jake is like get in and get out. Try not to fall into that bullshit. Try not to, stay too long, in a conversation of nothing. Or at least that's how I try to move anyway. So I return to the Almighty and be built up. How am I built up? I'm built up, or I'm getting built up, I should say. Sorry, misspoke. I'm getting built up the more and more I, deal with these fucking people in the world. And also I'm getting built up, when I'm alone, because then my mind is on Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. And of course everything is a balance, where you may have a hobby, or you may have something that you do, or something, to balance out your life. It's good to have that too. Let me see. The book of Job, chapter 22 and verse 24. Then thou shalt lay up gold as dust, and the gold of Ophir as the stones of the brooks. Yea, the Almighty shall be thy defense, and thou shalt have plenty of silver. And that's what it's about, building that relationship with Yahweh Bashem Yahushai during your solitude, during your peaceful times. Because we're entering into a time where the people aren't going to have peace. They haven't developed in their mind how to find peace. Yeah, okay, some of them might find a happy place or wherever, but our peace lies in our Savior, our power. That's where our peace lies. or resides. You know. Let me see what else I want to get. Oh, and that's another thing too, because during your time of, I'll say this, being that you, we try to be separate from Jake, we still got to be around Jake. And even though we don't do what Jake do, in terms of, being in the world or whatever, we do find some forms of entertainment, albeit, you play pool, you exercise, uh, uh, um, you do some extra curricular activities, like basketball or whatever, It's good to have a hobby. But even in that, there's a level of disdain for Jake because for some people, jealousy sets in. You know, the fact that you're able to turn it off at the drop of a dime infuriates some people. You know, Jake likes to stay in, a world of confusion, during these times. And the fact that you're able to turn off, certain situations, it infuriates Jake because Jake likes to perpetuate shit just to show how, I don't know, how masculine he is or what the fuck ever, you know. But we use wisdom in what we do, or at least you should anyway. You know, learn how to cut off being a part of this world. And that skill is a very good skill to learn because we're entering into a time where Jake is just gonna fucking hate you. There's no question about it. Jake's gonna hate you. I had a Jake look at me when I was leaving the plantation and said, you know, I saw you on YouTube. You an Israelite, right? That's why you always by yourself. So it's obvious, to some in terms of, how we just like to be alone and we're comfortable with that. That Jake, I guess, didn't have a problem with it, but there's some Jakes that actually will have a problem with it. That would actually think that you're too good, to be around them. That you're too good to chill with them or whatever. You know. But at the end of the day, it boils down to the fact that they just fucking hate you. Which leads me to, I wasn't going to bring it out, but which leads me to John 15 and 18. If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. You know? So they're going to hate the fact that you would rather not go riding with them. They're going to hate the fact that you don't want to hang with them. They're going to hate the fact that you want to be separate from them. They're going to hate the fact that your conversation is different than theirs. They're going to hate the fact that you have light, emanating from your spirit, and their light is not lit. They're going to hate you for that, and in that hatred, they're going to try to deliver us up. So we can't be ignorant to that, you know. We have to always keep our ears to the ground and our eyes looking forward because, while while they're in the world, we're examining the world for the world to come. Meaning we're looking at the prophecies and we're examining those prophecies based on what's going on in the world. So my solitude away from these people really helps me to do that. It really helps me to, hone in on, what's going on in the news in terms of politics, weather and geopolitics and, whatever. The monetary system, science, you know. We look at all these things, you know. And as long as you're among these people doing what they do, living the lives that they live, it could be, paying attention to these things can pull you away from your greater purpose, you know, to be a watchman, to be a prophet, you know. So let me see what else I want to get. This ain't gonna be a long lesson, but this is a lesson nonetheless. To illustrate or elaborate on the fact that these people are looking at us, wondering what's different about us. They're watching, asking themselves, why do we seem so different to them? And they can't put a finger on it because they can't they can't discern the spirit. They just don't have that gift. And so you could be somewhere and, I'll give you a case in point. Some brothers came down and we had a beautiful time together when they came down, and, we went to a little pub or whatever, a little bar or whatever, and we stayed to ourselves. But what was noticed was the people just started gathering around us. Now, granted, it was in an area where, the people might want to go and play pool or whatever, but there was some there that just didn't want to play pool, but they were congregated around us, and that's just how it is sometimes, people just want to be around the men of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai, and and just being inquisitive on why are we so different from them. And that answer is going to be blatantly clear in the near future when Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahweh Shai will make it known who are his chosen. So, yeah, let me see what else I want to get. I guess I'll get this because, let me just bring it out. The book of Amos, chapter 3 and verse 3. Can two walk together except they be agreed? As I was saying earlier, a lot of times we gotta Clark Kent our shit. More so than not. So they don't understand when we just are able to cut it off. In other words, cut them off. Because our interactions with the people of the world, well, my interactions with the people of the world is very minimal. And the reason why it's minimal is because we don't share the same interests. We don't share the same thoughts of life. We don't share the same power. We don't even share the same beliefs. We might do the same job or go to the same places, but essentially it stops there. That's as far as our interests or our commonality will go. And they can't understand why you don't want to be around them after work. I can't tell you how many times, I've been invited places by people that are of the world. No, I don't want to be. Nah, I'm good. Hey, look, a few of the people are going to X, Y, and Z. You want to come? Nah, I'm good. Because I am good. I'd rather spend that time watching bros videos or getting into the scriptures or, conversing with a bro on the phone than do what these jakes are doing. They're not paying attention. They don't understand the sign of the times. You know, they can't even discern the weather. Here it is, been raining left and right, and I haven't seen a fucking jake with an umbrella yet. So these people don't have a clue, which is why we as watchmen stand upon our watch. You know, to pay attention. You know, I have nothing to do with a hyena, nor a hyena with a lion. You won't see that. And if you see it in nature, at some point, one of the motherfuckers is going to be eaten by the other. It's just not going to happen in nature. You know? Like I said, you know, this ain't going to be a long lesson, you know, but I just wanted to put it out there, you know, we're being watched by the people, by the common everyday people, because they see the light within us and they can't put a finger on it. You know, they're like the bugs being drawn to the light. And that's what we are to the world. We are a light to the world. A light to the world of Yasharallah. And trust me, more and more people are going to start, you know, flying towards that light or coming towards that light. Especially when spiritual powers come into play. You know, bros start healing people. You know, bros start flying and jumping over buildings or jumping over walls and, you know, moving as sparks. You know, teleporting, feeding, you know, masses of people. You know, even though all these things were written for our learning. The people see that there's something different about us. So just know that you're being watched, Jake, by the common people, not just by the people that's trying to set a trap for us. Anyhow, you know, this is just something that was on my spirit. You know, I grabbed a few precepts from the book of Job or, you know, Amos that I found fitting, you know, to do with this lesson. And so with that, I'd like to give all praise, glory, and honors to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahushai, Bahashim, Harakak, Badash. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations unto the elect of the nation of Israel. Shalom.